Writing about search has helped me to learn about search because you can't form a coherent thought unless you understand the topic.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 17th episode, we talk with PPC Expert and industry thought leader Melissa Mackey from Gyro Marketing. Now, if you pay close attention to our podcast, you'll probably notice two things. 2 weeks ago, we released an episode with Phil Mackey. Same last name, but as far as I know, there's no relation. The other thing is that we are moving to an every other week release of podcast interviews. This schedule change will help us release episodes consistently and keep up the quality of Jumpstart episodes. But if you still want your weekly fix of Jeffalytics, have no fear. There may be something new coming to your earbuds in 2016. We recorded this episode while I was in Minnesota, back for a few weeks to teach at the University of St. Thomas and ManQuest. Melissa Mackey is a PPC expert with many years of experience in the field. How much experience? Well, she was using Google AdWords back when you could get clicks for 5 cents a piece. While working for a company that sold magazines through direct mail, Melissa was asked to investigate that whole Google AdWords thing. The rest, you could say, is history. Melissa soon learned AdWords inside and out and found many ways to optimize and improve the results she could obtain through search advertising. That curiosity and desire to drive results is a guiding principle of Melissa's success. But not only that, Melissa is a valued member of the PPC community, a thought leader for her blog, and a speaker at premier digital marketing conferences. Before we get to our interview with Melissa, let's have a word from our sponsor, ppccourse.com. If you're interested in becoming Google AdWords certified but don't know where to start, check out PPC Course from Jeffalytics. We talk about the principles of successful paid advertising and help you become Google AdWords certified over the course of 28 video lessons. Learn more at ppccourse.com. Now it's time to talk with Melissa Mackey. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Melissa. We're here with Melissa Mackey. Melissa, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on here, and I've been reading your blog for quite some time now, and I've picked up some great tips. I know you're really active in the PPC community, and so I'm looking forward to hearing about how you got there. So let's go back to the beginning. When did you learn, or when did you realize that you were interested in this career in marketing?
It's been a long time. I've been interested in marketing for as long as I can remember. So when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to do something in advertising or media. I initially wanted to be a television broadcaster. And so I went to college for telecommunication, but I quickly realized that really wasn't going to be where I was going to make a career. So kind of moved into more of the advertising side of the business. And I've been there ever since. So I've taken a lot of twists and turns on my way to search specifically. But being in advertising and marketing has just always been an interest of mine for as long as I can remember.
Great. So, and it looks like just doing a little bit of LinkedIn spying, you did go to school for that. So How was it like going to school for marketing when you went there? What type of coursework did you do? What did you study? How did all that come together?
Yeah. So I'm showing my age a little bit here, but I was in school in the 80s and early 90s. I was in undergrad in the 80s and grad school in the 90s. So I did take a lot of marketing and advertising courses, and a lot of that information, surprisingly, the foundation of marketing has not changed and probably won't for the foreseeable future, where you need to make sure you've got, the 4 P's of marketing: price, product, place, people. That hasn't changed and isn't going to. So all of that foundation that was laid when I was taking those courses, both in undergraduate and in graduate school, has really served me well. The actual media has changed a lot. Obviously, paid search didn't exist back then, and Google was not around, but there was always some kind of way to reach your customers, and learning about creating effective messaging, how to promote to them, how to find out who your customers are. All of those courses and projects and things that I slaved over while I was in school really have helped me to understand, how to be a good marketer. And of course, job experience is invaluable as well. But having that marketing background from an education standpoint, I think has really been helpful to me.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny because a lot of people that I've talked to didn't have a marketing background, and myself, I didn't have a marketing background either. And I think that it really does because you don't learn the basics and you don't learn the fundamentals, it really does sort of have you start in the middle, and that can be good and bad. Sometimes you focus way too much on platforms and on what's available for you right now, as opposed to the principles that guide you into the future. So it's nice to see that you have that background, and it really guided you through all the transitions and through all the different developments in technology as it's gone along.
Yeah, technology and platforms and everything are super important. And outside of paid search, I'm really not an expert on on most of those. I use a lot of different platforms and technologies, but don't really consider myself an expert at them. And we definitely need people who are experts. But a lot of times you run into shiny object syndrome, especially in online, where just because something's out there, people all want to run to try it. And the question and clients do this too, right? It's not just the advertising professionals. So clients will come to me and say, "Hey, I heard, you could run ads on Pinterest." And I'm like, "Well, do you have a visual?" And this is a client who's selling software, or something. And I'm like, "What are you going to put on Pinterest and pay big money to send people to that's going to be compelling to them?" And then they're like, "Oh," like people don't think about, what's their offer, where's their audience. They get caught up in the shiny object syndrome. And I think for someone like me who has the background and more of starting from a marketing foundation and a fundamentals from that standpoint, helps to pull people back a little bit from technology is great and awesome, and certainly not saying you shouldn't test new things, but you need to think about, is this really going to achieve your marketing objectives?
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to, right? And I think that you're right. I've been in many meetings where people say, "Well, what's our strategy here? What's our strategy there?" And it's really trying to take advantage of these new things that are coming out, which can be a competitive advantage in some ways. The first, the early adopter advantage, but I don't think that's the same as a strategy, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be there just because these platforms are out there. I think that ultimately it's what am I trying to sell and who am I trying to sell it to, and are these the people who are there?
Right.
And interesting, because I think that it's a reminder we all need to have, right? Is that just because something's new doesn't mean that it's going to be important. But I think that we also need to pay attention to the new things in case it becomes the important thing. Because maybe in 6 months, or in the next 6 months, it doesn't fit in. But maybe in the next 6 years, it could change the entire direction of your business. So there's a little bit of, you need to pay attention to things in the midterm, because that's really where they could become important. I was going to say, what were the technologies? Was there any any technologies that would be funny to us now that were emphasized in your coursework at school, or that sort of guided you along the way? Was there anything that you're like, "Oh, you need to pay attention to this or that"?
Yeah. I typed papers on a typewriter, not a computer. This is how long ago I was in school. For undergrad. For graduate school, I did have a computer, like an actual PC, but so there wasn't a lot of technology out there, cell phones, iPads, none of that had been conceived of yet. But one thing that was really getting a lot of play, especially when I was in undergraduate school, was cable TV.
Mm-hmm.
So this was in the days of, MTV and ESPN, and all these channels were new. And that was something different. We had 3 channels for most of the time that I was growing up, and they were all kind of trying to be all things to all people. And all of a sudden, cable came out, and now we had MTV, which was music, which actually played music at that time, and ESPN was sports, and you had CNN that was news, and some of these early cable channels. And this was the first foray into really kind of content marketing and matching an audience. So you have a sports fan, you have a news junkie, you have a music fan. It was really starting to splinter that audience in a way that had not been seen before. And so I took some courses in cable marketing and thought that was the way I was going to go. And actually, by the time I graduated, I realized that that was almost being left behind as well, and new things were starting to come on. But the internet was very brand new when I was in graduate school, and I could tell even then that was going to be something big, just from the old chat rooms that you could get in with people who, there was a chat room for everything under the sun, and some of it was a little bit shady, but there were legit chat rooms too. Mm-hmm. It was all of these audiences and ways to slice and dice the universe more than just CBS, NBC, ABC was doing that really grabbed my attention.
Yeah, to get to the point where you're going after the right people as opposed to the right message to everyone, or trying to find the find a message that appeals to every single person that's
Yeah,
watching one of these three networks.
right, absolutely. So all of the the creative process that you went through. It used to be you got to get eyeballs and you got to get people to pay attention, and like you said, you got to be have something for everybody, and it really excluded a lot of people from traditional media, even things like newspapers, and you had a lot of people going in magazines because that's where the audience was. And um, but how do you know that that's really the right person reading that magazine? And um, these new technologies that came out, all of a sudden you knew, not exactly, but you had a lot better idea who that person was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's, I think that's what hooked me as well when I was doing this. Maybe it seems like a little bit later in the process, but just knowing that you can find the people that you want to advertise to or that you want to talk to, as opposed to trying to send a message out to everybody, that's really powerful. And I think that's where a lot of people have their aha moments with the online world, is that you have that level of customization, especially when it comes to search, because not only is search, it's not just discovering people that you want to target, but it's also discovering them when they're raising their hand and asking for an answer. They're looking for something. They're looking for a provider of service, whoever it is, to help them out. They're looking for the discovery point. So I think that you go all the way from what they might have taught in marketing classes in school, which is very fundamental things that we need to do, all the way to the reality of being able to target anybody you want. That's a huge opportunity for us as marketers to go after. And I think that it really draws a lot of us in.
Yeah, it's definitely what drew me into paid search. So I was doing traditional marketing when Google AdWords came out in 2002. They came out with they had a pay per impression model, I think starting around 99 or 2000. And of course, the old Overture was around as well. But it was really Google, because Google was just so new and hot, and everybody was talking about it. When they came out with AdWords, we'd been struggling at the company. I was working in house at the time for a company that sells magazine subscriptions, and the magazine industry was in decline even at that time. And we were struggling with, how do we not waste so much money trying to reach the person who wants to subscribe to this particular magazine right now? And search came along, and boom, there it was. People were saying, oh, I want to subscribe to Newsweek or Time or Cosmo or whatever. They were typing in searches for that, and we found that we could be competitive, and it was so much less expensive than what we were doing prior to that, with a more of a mass marketing technology. I wouldn't even call it technology. It was very rudimentary, and we could send them right to that page on our website and they could check out. And I mean, we made money day one testing this, and it was a special project that got assigned to me. And I still thank my lucky stars that I was the lucky one that got assigned that project, because this has, obviously become a career for me. Because with the traditional kind of print and things, we were doing a lot of direct mail, and you have this life cycle with direct mail. You send out a mailer and you're going to get most of your responses, probably 80 to 90% of your responses in the first week, but you can continue to get responses to a direct mail piece for up to a year.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to wait for a year to find out really how well that mail, it sounds so funny to think about that, but we had to wait that long. And here was search, and you knew within minutes whether you got a response or not. So it was just incredible and so exciting. And you had so much data about the people. You knew what keyword they searched for. You knew which ad variation they clicked on. You could use site analytics to figure out what else they did on your website. I mean, this was data that we just did not have before. So it was super, super cool and exciting.
Yeah. And that's interesting. So the direct mail world, I spent a little bit of time in there, but it pretty quickly became digitized, if you will. And I know exactly what you're talking about, the pain around having a campaign being out there for a year. And actually you need to plan that campaign a lot of times for 6 months, or 3 to 6 to 12 months beforehand, and before you even get it out, because of the lead times with printing and all that. If you make a little mistake, if you have a typo, it lives on forever, or you need to issue it again. There's postage fees. There's all these different vendors that are involved with it. And then, and it can be effective if postage is low enough, or it can be effective in many ways if you do it right, but you really need to make sure you do it right. Whereas it sounds like you were doing that, and then they're just like, hey, try this new online thing. And somebody came to you, maybe they read about it, or they thought maybe it was something to work. And it's almost the opposite of that, right? It's the costs are really low, and you can target pretty much anything you want to target. And because, and this is my interpretation, correct me if I'm wrong, but because clicks were so cheap, you could be profitable from day one, even if you didn't know the best way to do it. So you might not have known how to optimize these things, but optimization might not even have been the question at the top of your hand. You're like, okay, I put this into Google and I made money. And then eventually, as it got more mature, then you need to work on the techniques to optimize and to make it more sustainable long-term, and to focus on return on investment and that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So our goal initially, once we did this for literally a day or two and realized we were making money, because as you said, the clicks were so cheap back then, 5-10 cents a click, and there weren't that many advertisers.
Mm-hmm.
It was so new. And so, this was just phenomenal. I mean, we were accustomed to losing money to acquire a customer because it was a subscription. So, you get a customer in, you're willing to invest in that because then they renew with you, and that's much more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you make your money in the long run. But here we were making a profit right out the gate in acquisition, which was unheard of. And so our goal initially for probably the first 6 months to a year was just get everything in market that we can. We started with a handful of titles that we were advertising, and then we, eventually got all of our magazine titles into search. And at that time, it was so manual. There were no editors. There was no bulk upload. You were literally in the Google AdWords online UI, typing in keywords, typing in ad copy, or maybe if you were lucky, you copied and pasted it from a spreadsheet or something. But it was extremely manual. We actually hired an intern over the summer to help us get our entire catalog uploaded. And then there was the matter of keeping all the prices up to date. And, there were no shopping feeds. Just none of that was around. It's
Mm-hmm.
so funny to think about it now. But so that was our goal initially for a long time, was just to get everything in there and get it, keep it up to date. And then after about a year, then we started thinking about, okay, how do we make this better?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we figure out, we were tracking from the beginning. That's the good thing about coming from direct mail, is you track everything that goes out. And so I think we were probably ahead of the curve from a lot of people doing that. And
I think you were a couple of years ahead of Google Analytics, weren't you?
Yeah, we were using, NetTracker.
Okay.
And it was a log file analysis. And so every night this thing would run and you'd get the data that morning. There was no real time or anything. GA was Urchin at that time.
Yep.
And it was expensive. So yeah, it but we had built a homegrown system for that, because we had all these promo codes and things that we'd use for direct mail that went into our backend database, and the website had to plug into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
We were just kind of doing this homegrown. But we realized, hey, there's some stuff here that's probably not performing very well, and some stuff that's performing great, and keyword research and all those things that are so basic and simple now. That was a big deal, and just learning how to do all that and figuring out, what we needed to do to make it better. There weren't a lot of people out there doing this, so we were all kind of learning as we went along.
Yeah, and that's right around the time that I got into this as well. And you're right. You basically experiment to see what's out there. Other people start talking, and eventually everybody realizes that, and then more people get into it. Prices go up. There's a lot of need to make this better. But at first, it's just like, let's just drink from this fire hose and just be happy that we're there. But then it takes, after a little bit, it's like, okay, well, how do we make this better? And I think that a lot of people, it's purely experimentation and reading and learning and hearing from other people, going to conferences, that type of stuff is really what makes you, thrive in these areas. Anybody can put out an ad when the inventory is really inexpensive or, cheap to do, but it's really hard to make it into a sustainable thing, into something that's going to last well into the future. And I think that, even if you master PPC, even if you were to master it 10 years ago, the techniques you needed 10 years ago versus the techniques now are completely different.
Yeah, they're totally different. And really people need to still be, to a great extent, experimenting and reading and learning. Because there are whole courses now on how to learn AdWords, and there are books, and all that is fantastic. And I wish I'd had a lot of that when I started, because I would have made a lot fewer mistakes. But we learn by making mistakes. So, you bid on the wrong keyword, or you put an ad out there that's incorrect or whatever, and you learn from that firsthand, and then you don't do it again. You can read it in a book and go, okay, and then, forget it 5 minutes later, and it's not going to happen. And I did a ton of reading on the forums that were out there at the time. That was kind of what Twitter is now, where people would gather on a handful of forums, some of which don't even exist any longer. And of course the conferences as well, once those kind of came into being right around that same time, I think. And it was just a matter of talking to people. I made sure, because on the forums, everybody was equal. Like you could have somebody who is a rock star search person, but they were just on the forum answering questions just like anybody else.
Yep.
And I took advantage of that. And at every conference I went to, I was the annoying person raising my hand and asking questions all the time and hogging the mic because I just wanted to learn. And I thought, you know what, these people there's so few experts. I need to take advantage of that. And so I really did. And I don't see a lot of people doing that at conferences now, not like in the old days.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a shame because it's like, look, your employer or someone paid for you to be here. And you're sitting here checking your Facebook and whatever, and you're not even listening, and you're not asking questions. You're not, making the most out of this session that you could be. And it's kind of sad to me.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. I mean, I've seen that happen. That at first it's the Wild West, and anybody can have a voice, which is good and bad because anybody can talk to anybody. And then sometimes people emerge as like the voice of the industry, and then everybody just listens to what they have to say and doesn't necessarily think about experimenting anymore. They say, okay, well, if this person said it, this is truth. But the reality is that it's just maybe a better guess, but it's still just an educated guess as to here's what we think is happening. Here's what we think the results are going to be. Here's based on our experience. But in paid search in particular, there's so many variables that are not included in those case studies and those success stories. There's landing pages, there's the offer, there's your brand quality and equity, there's how long you've been doing it for, there's quality scores, there's everything with your account and so many different things that factor into this, that it's like you need to see how these are going to be for yourself. So you might read to get ideas and you might ask questions of people, but the reality is that you got to try these things yourself to see what the results are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm starting to see a lot of that now where, like you said, there are people who are established in the industry, and I don't know if I'm included in that or not. But even if I am, even if I say something, and I certainly say what I think and believe, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You've got to try it because every account, I don't care if you're in the same vertical as the person who's making these claims, your account is not going to be the exact same as their account.
Yeah.
And you've got to test things for yourself. You've got to try it because, like you said, there's this whole experience. There's keywords, ad copy, landing pages, back end systems. Ultimately, you end up dealing with a real person at some point. With a lot of, especially our clients at Gyro where I work, they're all B2B. And so, you're just kind of starting a relationship with these people using search, and it's lead gen, and then that lead gets handed off to an actual salesperson that's picking up the phone. And so that experience is not going to be at all the same from company to company, even people in the same vertical. And I think there is a lot of blindly just, well, so-and-so said such and such, and so that's the gospel. And I just do not feel that way at all. I think it's so easy to test and search. If you're not doing it, you're really not doing it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the important thing here. And that's why I like your blog so much, is because you're not telling people, here's how you need to do it. You say, have you thought about this? And you provide templates where they can put their own data into it. And you're sort of just extending the conversation, not just saying, here's what we need to do. And I think that, and I didn't mean, if anybody in the community is listening, I didn't mean to say that the celebrities in the community are doing anything wrong. I think they're amazing because they're sharing such great data. I just think that as practitioners, or anybody in this industry, we can't just listen to it and then assume that will work for us. We need to bring in our own context. We need to put our own context and business spin on it as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. It's not that what these people are saying is wrong, because I don't think people are out there, not telling the truth, right? I think they're saying that this is what we're seeing for our clients. But then you've got to vet that with your clients, and it gives you a great starting point. So I get tons of ideas from things that I read from people, and whether I think it's a great idea or a bad idea, at least it makes me think. And that's kind of my goal with my blog, is to, say like, hey, here's how I'm looking at something. And a lot of times I'll write a post and say, this is what this looks like to me. What are you guys seeing? And then my readers will jump in and say, well, we actually saw this or that, or, it's a good dialogue going on there. And that's what I'm after. I'm not after, I don't want to be the star or, the person that says my way or the highway. That's not what I'm all about. I'm really about collaborating and getting people to think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I'd like to get into PPC Chat a little bit later and talk about that, because I think that community is so strong and so giving that I think that anybody who's looking to get into this area should definitely join that. And we'll make sure we link to it in the notes as well. And I'd like to talk about how you got involved with that just in a little bit. But I had one question that came to mind that I think might be relevant for people listening here, is that you and I think we're both fortunate to have get involved with Google AdWords when the cost per click price was low, when there wasn't as many advertisers. And I think that some of the rainmaking we were able to do early on is a lot more difficult now. Have you noticed any channels or any platforms that have that type of ability still? Or is there anything that people should be paying attention to if they're, because a lot of the people who are listening to this are looking to get into these areas, maybe not as established as we are?
Yeah, the days of 5-cent clicks are gone forever, I think. At least with search, with AdWords and Bing and Yahoo, you're not going to see the really cheap clicks and the low competition. It is a lot harder to make it work. Even in B2C, B2B is super expensive, or the arena that I play in. But even in B2C, it's quite competitive no matter what. You've got Amazon selling everything under the sun. And so you're automatically competing with them and a couple other heavy hitters. And it's difficult. Not to say it can't be done, because it totally can. And I'm not sure there is anything that's quite as easy to break in as what AdWords was in the early days for us. But I will say something that I still see relatively low cost per click is Facebook.
Yeah.
Facebook, we tell Facebook so much about ourselves that you can get super, super specific about who you want to target. And their cost per click I'm still seeing less than $1 for a lot of campaigns that I've run. And I've done stuff even on a volunteer basis for, local organizations here where I live and things. And even the small companies or organizations can make it work for them at a really low budget, because the clicks are cheap. You can target really specifically. And the Facebook objectives that they have, whether it's build followers or website clicks or events, they have so many different objectives, and they honestly those algorithms work really well. So it's a good way for people. I mean, you can still waste a bunch of money and do it poorly, but if you research and read and learn how to do it correctly, you can still get good traffic and conversions, depending on what your conversion is, with Facebook.
I agree. At first, when I tried to do Facebook, this is like 5-10 years ago, I tried to make it AdWords. I tried to just do AdWords on Facebook, and it was a disaster.
Yep.
But ever since then, making adjustments and taking advantage, I think Facebook's amazing in the value that it can represent. And I think that in some ways it's the anti-AdWords. They're sort of doing two different things, but they all sort of arrive at the same end result, and that is trying to find people who are interested in what you have to say, and getting them down the pipeline. I think that Facebook just offers more, like you said, more segmentation within the type of advertising you're doing, whereas Google, you're bidding on keywords, and so you're sort of limited to the amount of real estate they have, whereas Facebook has just so much more inventory and different ways that you can find people.
Yeah, and people spend so much time there.
Yeah.
People go to Google with a mission in mind, which is what makes it great, because you have a very clear idea of their intent. But if you want any kind of critical mass in terms of eyeballs and impressions and repetition, Facebook is the place to be.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting to see that transition, because I think that maybe even a couple of years ago that maybe that we wouldn't have been able to say that. And so it's interesting to see it go along. So that's okay, great. So you obviously at the magazine, the magazine company, you made the transition. You sort of, I don't know if you'd call it lucked into, but you're fortunate enough to have been maybe right place at the right time, as you might say it. And then, but obviously that doesn't get you all the way to becoming a speaker on this area and a thought leader in the industry. So how did you progress from doing some experiments, just getting your offline catalog into the online world. How did you progress with your knowledge and your skills as you went along?
Sure. So early on, I went to as many conferences as I could. I was lucky that the magazine subscription company I was working for was willing to invest in that because we were doing so well with search advertising. They wanted to learn how to do even more of it. So I was lucky enough to go to a lot of conferences early on. I did a ton of reading, like I said, reading the forums, reading everything I could get my hands on, and testing. And I really tried to find where the community was and hang out there and know where I could ask questions, because I was the only person in my organization. And if you're doing in-house search, a lot of times that's true. You're the only person doing search. And so, you don't have anybody in the office next door that you can walk down and ask a question. You've just got to figure it out on your own.
Yep.
And so I kind of developed this tribe of people, many of whom are still close friends of mine in the industry, that I could go to and ask questions, and we would kind of reciprocate and share information. And then in 2006 is when I launched my blog. So I'm coming up on 10 years. It'll be 10 years in May.
Wow, congrats.
I launched my blog as an experiment because I thought it would be, I actually wanted to see, do you remember Alexa, that traffic counting thing that that was out there?
It's still around, believe it or not.
It's still around. Yeah, it is still around. It was like a big deal at the time, and our boss was hung up on our Alexa ratings. And we kept telling him, you can game the Alexa ratings by just sitting on your website all day, and all of a sudden, it'll go up 100 points just because you sat there on the site. And so I launched my blog so that I could prove that I could game Alexa with my blog. And I did. It was funny, but I kind of liked doing all the writing. And actually, writing about search has helped me to learn about search, because you can't form a coherent thought unless you understand the topic. So just writing about it really helped. I eventually, in 2007, moved to the agency world. And honestly, being in an agency, I loved being in-house and I love agency both. So there's tons of pros and cons to each one. In the agency world, you get to work with a lot of different types of businesses. So it kind of gives you a perspective that you don't have when you're in-house. And so somebody said to me, I was at a conference asking a bunch of questions like I always did. And they said, well, you really should be speaking. And I was like, oh, nobody wants to hear from me. And they said, no, really, you should be speaking. And so I just pitched to speak, and I got picked and got up there. And I don't think I did very well the first time I spoke, but it's like anything else. You get better, you get feedback. Yeah. And that really kind of helped to catapult me out there. And then, with all the social media that's there now, it's just really easy to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. I mean, it's funny that when you talk about the blog, that's right around 2006 is when I started blogging, and a lot of people started to put blogs out there. And it was different then because there just wasn't as many people. So when I say everybody, I mean, I guess not as many people as have blogs now, but it was easier to get noticed, I'd say, and just easier to sort of connect with the community. But I think that is a good thing for everybody to know, is that when you write about something or when you teach it, which is in my case, when I started teaching, it really gave me a greater understanding than I ever thought I could. So I thought that I knew these things, but it's not until you try to simplify it for somebody else to understand that you really fully understand it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I got into agency, I immediately started training a lot of people, because the first agency I worked at was a smaller agency, and they were hiring a lot of kind of entry-level people. And so I was experienced with search, and so they were hiring entry-level people to help with search, or to, we were gaining clients and stuff, and needed people to I couldn't manage everybody. And anyway, so yeah, like you said, you realize, whoa, I've got to break this down. And then that helps you be able to explain it to clients, or if you're in-house, to your boss, who's not a search expert. Mm-hmm. If you really want people to adopt what's going, because again, the days of the 5-cent clicks and the huge profits day one are probably gone for most people. You've got to kind of sell it in a little bit more, and you have to be able to explain it in terms that a layman can understand. And we tend to, as in any industry, we have a lot of jargon. We have a lot of things that we talk about that as industry cohorts we all understand, but when you go to a layperson, they have no idea what a CPC or a
Mm-hmm.
CTA or LP or any of that is. So you've got to break it down and explain it, and by writing about it and teaching it really helps you to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's probably the best way to have retained knowledge is to share it with somebody else, or to try to summarize what you've learned to somebody else, and it really makes you do all the things we're talking about. And I think the other thing is just to have these conversations. And I think this is probably a good point to talk about PPC Chat and some of the other community things you've done. You've mentioned conferences, you've mentioned training internally, and but also this PPC Chat, which is a anybody wants to know, it's a weekly Twitter chat where you can talk about any topic around PPC, or there's a sort of a structured topic each week. How does that factor into this? How has that really helped you with the community as well?
That's been huge. PPC Chat, I owe so much to that Twitter chat. Um, I was on Twitter before PPC Chat started, and I, followed a lot of people that I knew or was familiar. A lot of people kind of went from the forums that I was talking about before. When Twitter really got big, they kind of jumped over to Twitter. And so I jumped with them as well and just started, kind of following them there and interacting. And but when PPC Chat came out, that just really kind of catapulted the conversation, because all of a sudden we now had a place where we could talk just about pay-per-click search and eventually paid social. And so you kind of had, I mean, there's the weekly chat that goes on for sure, and that's excellent. And everyone who's in search should sign up for Twitter if for no reason than to just follow those weekly chats. You don't have to say anything. You can just have an account and read what people are saying, and you'll learn a ton. But interacting with people throughout the week, because there's always a conversation happening there.
Yeah.
And that's where I get my late breaking news on search now, is from PPC Chat. I almost always see stuff there before I see it anywhere else. Or people will just say, hey, did anybody notice this? Or I'm having trouble I've posted questions when I can't figure something out, and almost inevitably somebody within a few minutes will come in and have an answer. The search engines themselves are now participating there. So there's an AdWords Twitter account and a Bing Ads Twitter account, and they'll get in and answer questions and offer help. And you kind of have a voice that way, because people are listening to you. And I started sharing my blog posts there, and I publish regularly. I try to always publish the same day and time every week, so people know that they can look for and you don't have to publish just once a week at the same time. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but that's what I've found for me. People know to look for my posts at that time, and I've gotten so much pickup for my blog just posting it on Twitter and sharing it, and then people will share it with their audience. And you don't want to spam the hashtag. Obviously, you want it to be relevant and not overkill, because we do see anytime that you get a good thing going, everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. And we've had some people posting things that I think are borderline not related to paid search, and just really kind of self-promotional spam, and you have to be careful to stay away from that. But I personally I've met so many people from the PPC Chat group in person. We're Facebook friends now. We know each other's kids' names and stuff, and it's just a wonderful community. And even better than that, it's a place to really learn about search.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really strong, tight-knit community too. Anytime you go on there, like you said, there's a lot of people who will post all the time. And if you have I have a tweet deck open with the PPC Chat open, I'm more of a lurker than a big participant, depending on time. But I think that you just, like you said, you can get breaking news, you can see other posts that are out there. And that's where, if you're looking to develop friendships and relationships, you can see the relationships develop on that hashtag, which is sort of cool to see it happen. And then if you go to a conference, it's a sort of a calling card. I remember I was at the HeroConf in London in just the end of last year, and I met several people that I had seen on PPC Chat, and I probably wouldn't have known who they were if I wouldn't have recognized their avatars, or if I wouldn't have seen them on there. So it's a conversation starter. It's a opportunity to just meet new people, get new ideas, and then also to stay up to date. Because I think that that's a fear that a lot of us have as marketers is, okay, well, this digital marketing world is changing so frequently. How do we keep up to date? And I think, as you said, that's actually a better news source than just about anything else you can see, because if something's important, the PPC Chat community will usually pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've watched so many people, like you said, about developing the relationships. And I've seen people who just got started a few years ago, and now they've become voices in the community. People like Kirk Williams is a good example. I mean, he was just starting out really not that long ago, and now he's one of the premier voices out there. And there's so many other examples like that, with people who just kind of poked their head in and started asking questions, and then went to conferences and walked up and met people. You really have your own little kind of, you have a social group built in when you go to a conference. It makes these large conferences, especially the SMXs and the ClickZ Lives and these large shows, it makes it a lot smaller when you know you have a friend from PPC Chat that you can sit with and have lunch with and go out to dinner with. And and we just have so many fun conversations. And if you're new to search, don't be intimidated. I mean, just get in there, and don't bombard people, and harass them. But if you're nice about it, if you use regular social graces, you'll really learn a lot. It's a good way to get started.
Yeah. Just be genuine, right? Just
right.
Don't try to dominate the conversation or try to push an agenda. Listen, share, make the community better, and you can be part of the community for sure.
Yeah, I always tell my kids, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in proportion. And if you do that in PPC Chat, you'll be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else that obviously PPC Chat's one way to keep up to date. I know that your blog is a lot of times written based on your experiences. So sharing things that you're seeing in the tools and as being a practitioner. Is there anything else that you use in order to keep up to date or to learn new techniques in this current time?
The conferences are still important, obviously, and go and listen and learn. Actually, go to sessions and take notes and ask questions. That's one. If you can't afford to go to conferences, there's a lot of good blogs out there. I've published a couple lists on my blog, beyondthepaid.com. You can go check that out. And there are also books that have been written about search. And the challenge with writing a physical book is that by the time you write it, a lot of the content's outdated because stuff changes. But the principles of search and of AdWords and Bing and all of that, they don't change that much, right? So a good structure of an AdWords campaign is still what was good 5 years ago is still good now in terms of a foundation. And so books like Advanced Google AdWords by Brad Geddes, and there's PPC An Hour a Day, that's David Zatella's book. These are great references, and I recommend, even though it seems old school to have a physical book in your hand, I guess you can get it on a Kindle or something too if you want to, but these are good desk references, and I'll still go back and look at those books because they cover the topics very thoroughly. And so if you're trying something new, like let's say you want to get into shopping, or you want to do some different kind of advertising that you haven't done, it's always good to get in and look at those. And there's so many good blogs out there. Search Engine Land has they're pretty up to date. Like I just saw on Search Engine Land this morning, first thing, that AdWords is going to do a revamp in terms of how the interface looks.
Yeah.
And long overdue, although I'm a little scared because I don't like when I can't find my stuff.
Yes.
But I saw that first on Search Engine Land. I saw it on Twitter, but then I read the information on Search Engine Land. And so they do a great job of keeping up with news and what's going on. So it's still good to read blogs. It's still good to read books.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing about books that's interesting is that even though they seem out of date because of the nature of what's evolving, you're right, though, it focuses. So we need to focus on the strategies and the mentality behind these decisions we're making, not where the button is. Because buttons are going to change. Buttons are going to move. I do in-person teaching, and every time I teach somebody in a classroom, I tell them, the first thing I say is, I will screw up in the middle of this class, and I won't know where something is. I'm going to get a little frustrated, and I'm going to sit here and try to find something for 5 minutes, and it happens every single time. So we just need to realize that that's just how this works. things aren't going to be where you thought they were. These products are going to get upgraded. Sometimes we're going to hate the upgrades, which actually happens quite often with AdWords.
Yep.
But the principle is that we're trying to find people who are looking on a search engine to find an answer. And those principles aren't going to change, and they haven't changed a lot. And so focus more on principles and basically on how do we do good business, not so much on where something is now or what it looks like, aesthetics, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such a good point to remind people of, because it really is about stepping back and thinking about what your goals are. This isn't a product assembly that's going to be the same time and time again. And, obviously we need things like that in this world where you just go, you turn on your microwave and it works the same every day, or your cell phone, or, things like that. We need obviously some stuff that we don't have to think about. But when it comes to marketing, and this goes beyond even AdWords, you really need to think about the concepts behind it and what you're trying to accomplish, and then you can worry about finding the button.
Yep, exactly. And it's even comes down to like landing page optimization and having a good landing page and conversion rates and everything. If you don't understand your business and where your business plays in this world, then it's going to be that no matter any technique or tactic you have in place, anything you do, no matter how many tests you run, you're probably not going to be optimal. You're probably not going to be at that point because there's a lot of things that need to happen in order for you to be successful. And it's not always within these tools. A lot of times it's actually within your strategies and within the way that your organization operates. And so you can't blame Google when you don't have a sound go-to-market strategy. When people don't want what you have, it's not always Google's fault. Now, sometimes they do some things to make it frustrating or to make you spend too much money to learn that lesson, but it's just how it goes.
Yeah, totally. And I see that actually a lot, and it's a little bit scary because you do see so many people that say, well, I tried AdWords and it didn't work. And then you go to their website and you find, 10 different barriers on the way to checkout, for e-commerce. And it's like, well, this has nothing to do with AdWords.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. You've got to kind of make sure your store is clean, if you will, before you go and do any marketing, really. And you've got to keep those goals in mind and make sure you have the back end to fulfill it.
Yep, exactly. You got to look at, you said the 4 Ps of marketing. You need to look at those. If you can't get that right, then none of these things are going to matter. And you can't blame Google when that doesn't happen. You can't, you can't blame Google. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our time. I just had a few quick questions. How much time do you spend focusing on your blog and personal branding and that type of stuff?
Oh, not as much as I would like to because there's not enough hours in the day, but I'll spend probably an hour a week, and this is all on my own time because it is my personal blog, but I'll spend about an hour a week writing the posts, and then maybe another 30 to 45 minutes kind of responding to comments that people have and doing maintenance type things and other, personal branding. I mean, I might spend another couple of hours interacting on Twitter and things like that. But to me, the personal branding and the actually using Twitter to help me do my job, there's a real fine line between the two of those. So I'm obviously on Twitter during the workday, and that is to stay up to date and to, ask questions or just really kind of give back to the community that's given me so much. So, I'm not spending 5 or 6 hours a day there by any stretch because I have actual work I have to do. But I think just by being there and being helpful goes a long way towards your personal brand. But the actual blog, I'd like to spend a lot more time on it, but there's just not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, I hear you. That's always it's always the problem. But as anybody who's listening, if you're looking at doing this, I think it does take a lot of time to get a blog going, but to maintain it, sometimes if you just focus on it, you can get it done in a couple hours a week and position yourself very well for opportunities and within the community. So that's great. And then one last question, and that is for anybody who is looking to get into this area of digital marketing, paid search, and paid media, whatever you want to call it, what pieces of advice would you have for them through their journey?
Yeah, so I would say be very curious, always question why. Ask why did something work? Why didn't something work? Why are we doing this? Why are we not doing that? You have to be very curious and ask a lot of questions because the answers are not going to be handed to you in this industry. There's going to be a lot of things that happen that you don't understand and you need to figure out. And sometimes you're never going to get an answer, but you need to really be curious to ask questions. And that goes to not being afraid to ask for help. Um, Things are new. I've been doing this for 14 years, and there are still things that I don't know. No one person, I think, knows everything about it, and so don't be afraid to ask questions and find people that do know things. And I would say, really networking is super important. I think a lot of people, and don't always just hide behind your Twitter handle. Obviously, that's huge and it goes a long way. And I don't get to as many conferences as I would like to either anymore. And so I do use social to stay in touch with people, but make sure you get out there and meet people with skin on. And, even if it's getting into a local AMA group, or there's a lot in a lot of the larger cities, there's groups like SLC SEM, which is the SEM group in Salt Lake City. There's one in Portland. There's one in Dallas. There's down in Miami or South Florida, there's one. Depending on where you live, you can find local groups of search people. I spoke at the Salt Lake City group last fall, and there was probably 100 people there. I mean, it was amazing. So, get out there. And some of them were new to search and didn't, they came up to me afterwards and asked a lot of questions. That was awesome.
That's great.
So, yeah, get out there and meet people for real.
Awesome. And it's funny because I was one of the co-founders of MN Search, so the Minnesota one.
Yes, that's as well, another great,
which is a great organization. I highly recommend that. But I'm going to be speaking at SLC SEM in June. So I'm glad that you had such a great experience there. I'm really looking
They're awesome out there. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, great. And then the last comment, and this is maybe my conspiracy theory hat, is that just when you say trust, I mean, or putting trust into Google or not being curious on what's happening there. The thing is that if you're not curious, or if you're not asking questions about why these things are happening at all times, that's really that's a big problem in this area, right? If you're not curious and if you're not questioning all the metrics and trying to find the right answers, the default is spending a lot of money. It's spending a lot of money. Maybe it's your money, maybe it's your company's money, maybe it's your nonprofit's money, whatever that ends up being. That can be a big issue. And so if you don't ask the questions, then the default answer is often going to be either you don't get any exposure or you get way too much exposure. And so it's really important, like you said, to always be questioning whether you're targeting the right people and whether you have the right settings in place, whether you're doing this the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not to sound dire, but I've seen people lose their job when they did not do that, because precisely that, they spent a lot of money and they couldn't explain what they got out of it. That's not cool. So, I mean, it's not a Super Bowl ad expensive usually, but it's still, it costs money to do this. And because, everybody knows that you can measure AdWords. Like your clients, even if they know nothing else about AdWords, they know it's really measurable. So you've got to be able to measure and explain why something worked or didn't work and what you're going to do about it. And just, always be questioning why.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing they don't tell you in the guided tour of AdWords is
right.
They make it,
sure.
It says start your campaign, put your credit card number in there.
Yeah.
And maybe you choose a country, maybe you don't. But what they don't tell you is that you need to have a strategy in place in order for it to work. And that's really what I think your mission of your blog and being in the community is all about. And just making sure that people don't make that mistake. I've made these mistakes that we're talking about. I'm sure you've made a few of them along the way as well.
Absolutely.
Just trying to make everybody make better decisions as they go along.
Yep, for sure.
Great. Well, on that note, I think this is a really awesome interview. So I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Excellent. Okay, we'll end it there. I know that you're at a time constraint, but I just wanted to thank you again for being on. This is awesome. Really liked hearing your journey and some good advice. And I think that, I haven't really done much PPC on the podcast yet. So my listeners are looking forward to it as well. And,
great. Awesome. Cool.
Melissa started in marketing before the internet was a thing. Back then, cable television was the medium of the future. Things sure have changed. Much of her success can be attributed to curiosity and passion for delivering the best results possible for her company and clients. This curiosity helped guide her to paid search when the industry was in its infancy. It's also helped her learn Facebook advertising and other media in order to ride the next waves of advertising. Perhaps my favorite tip from Melissa is about joining the community. Think about all the positive things that have happened to her since joining PPC Chat community on Twitter. Communities are alive, folks. Follow them, read them, and once you build up your confidence, interact with them as well. Remember, You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them accordingly. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Melissa.
When you go to a conference, there's a person always raising their hand. The annoying person that always got something to ask. We're not saying such behavior is a recipe for success, but seize a freaking opportunity, 'cause it's as good as it gets.